Kevin Schofield joins us live from Westminster, the beating heart of democracy. Of course, Kevin, political editor at HuffPost UK. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, Ian. How are you?
Good as gold at this end. Nice to have you with us. I mean, lots to talk about here. Let's start then with, I think, the former Prime Minister is a good place. John Major. Now, he's not quite Tony Blair in his kind of interventions. Mr. Blair seems to pop up all over the place. But he's given an interview. He had a lot to say. And one of the main aspects of it was that he didn't much like the Tory Rwanda plan, said it was un-British, unconservative and un-Christian.
Yeah, you're right. He certainly didn't hold back, did he? And it's the first time we've heard from John Major in a little while. He chooses his moments, you're right, a bit more than Tony Blair, who seems to be in and out of TV studios with stunning regularity. But yeah, I mean, John Major, basically what he said is he didn't want to say anything before the election, but now the election's out the way, the Conservatives got trounced. He feels he can now come out and say what he thinks and, as he would say, give some advice to the party as it seeks to plot a way forward. So yeah, he's had a lot to say on Rwanda, obviously, not a fan. Brexit as well, again, unsurprisingly, not a great fan of Brexit, and he's warning the party, look, don't go veering off to the far right. One of the other quotes is, we lost 5 seats to Reform, but we lost an awful lot more to Labour and the Liberal Democrats, so that's where we should be worrying about getting votes back rather than tacking off to the right, chasing after Nigel Farage.
Well, you see, on that specific point, I thought, well, that is true, of course. They lost more to Labour and the Lib Dems than they did to Reform, so why chase the Reform vote? But, of course, there were many areas where Reform came a very close second, and I think that's sort of been extrapolated from his logic a little bit there.
Yeah, you're right. I don't think it's quite as straightforward as John Major is making out. It certainly isn't the case that they don't need to worry about Reform. Far from it. They are eating into the Conservative vote up and down the country, as well as eating into Labour vote as well, actually, and a lot of places as well. They're certainly, again, in second place in an awful lot of Labour-held constituencies too. But yeah, you know, John Major is from the sort of one nation, moderate wing of the Conservative Party, so it's maybe not that much of a surprise. He says that when he left office in 1997, he told a very young George Osborne, make sure that the right wing don't take over the party. So his idea would be, you know, maintain the centre ground, hoover up votes from Labour and the Liberal Democrats, and that will see the Conservatives in a good place. But who's to say? It will all depend on who they choose to be their next leader, obviously. And we're not going to know that for another 6 weeks or so.
And the one thing we do forget about dear old grey John Major is that he is the most successful Conservative leader in the last 30 years, since Margaret Thatcher. He won an election outright. He stayed there for, 7 years in the job. He did better than Cameron. He did better than Johnson. He did better than Liz Truss. I mean, Johnson won with a convincing majority, but he wasn't there for very long. And clearly better than Rishi and Theresa May.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm just about old enough. I say just about. I'm definitely old enough to remember when John Major was Prime Minister, and you know, it's strange now to look back on it as a period of actual calm and political stability. Really didn't really feel like it at the time, but when you look at a lot of what came, certainly since 2010 onwards, it was, and he held it together. It wasn't easy for him. I think he was always going to lose the election in 1997, and that in many ways has come to define his legacy. But in actual fact, as you say, he was in power for 7 years, coming on the back of Margaret Thatcher, certainly not an easy person to follow. And actually, he did pretty well. And you're right, he was, by any measure, a successful Conservative Prime Minister.
But he was very dull, of course, and Spitting Image just brilliantly satirised that dullness of him and Norma sitting there eating peas with their grey attire, their grey skin. Everything was grey about him. It's extraordinary. He was the Chancellor, wasn't he, before he was Prime Minister, which I'd forgotten about.
That's right. He was Margaret Thatcher's Chancellor, and he was something of a dark horse, really, when she stood down. I think everyone assumed that Michael Heseltine, who had plunged the dagger, that he would become the leader, and obviously it didn't work out that way. So yeah, and in a way, he was almost the accidental Prime Minister, but yeah, he'd done a reasonable job as Chancellor, and then, you know, he had the famous backseat driver in Margaret Thatcher. You know, she was quite critical from the backbenches when he was leader. But yeah, as I say, managed to hold it together pretty well. And I think that the party would be well advised to at least listen listen to what he has to say.
Let's look at Keir Starmer, the current Prime Minister then. The gifts keep on mounting, it seems. This isn't going away anytime soon, Kevin. Keir Starmer previously, of course, criticised others for this sort of cronyism thing, you know, taking money from your rich mates. And there is the Duke and Duchess of Downing Street now doing precisely that and doing it with aplomb, it seems. 5,000 quid's worth of designer clothes for his wife, tickets for concerts. He's been to Wimbledon, he's been to Taylor Swift, he's been around the place more times than Louis Theroux, it seems. I mean, this guy is doing all right out of it. He's declared everything, he says, so there's nothing to see in that respect, but it's never the greatest of looks, is it?
It's not, and he does love a freebie, there's absolutely no doubt about that. It's something like over £100,000 worth of hospitality, freebies, benefits in kind since he became Labour leader, which is by far and away more than other party leaders. When you look at what other previous prime ministers accepted when they were in office, you know, that rather pales into insignificance as to what Keir Starmer has accepted. And yeah, you're right, his point has always been, when he's been asked about it this week, is all the rules were followed, everything was properly declared, although in the case of his wife, it wasn't declared on time. It was actually declared a little bit late, the clothes that she received. However, just, you know, on the back of, you know, we're still in a cost of living crisis, they're taking money off pensioners. It's just a terrible look.
It's really an awful look when you're
Prime Minister to be doing this.
Your wife's walking around in thousands of pounds worth of designer kit at the same time that, even though it's not from the same pot, it's all legal and all the rest of it, but it's just not a good look. I was just thinking, Kevin, maybe, you know, if they need some extra cash, they could borrow it from Sue Gray, because we found out, as I'm sure you're aware in the last hour, that she actually earns more than the Prime Minister.
Yeah, I mean, it's an extraordinary story, a real briefing war now going on behind the scenes against Sue Gray. There's an awful lot of unhappy special advisors who think that it's unfair that she's been paid, as you say, more than the Prime Minister, which is remarkable in itself, but also that she has a say in how much they get paid, and they think that they're not being paid enough. So clearly they have gone to the media with this story and handed it to them on a plate. And if you read the story and you read some of the quotes from unnamed advisors, it's really, really angry stuff. And it's remarkable to think that Labour have only been in power for 2.5 months, and yet already they seem to be at each other's throats. And
that is a government position, civil service position, rather than a party position? What's the deal there?
Yeah, no, she was Chief of Staff, so she was obviously appointed to work for the party before they got into power. She has been the Chief of Staff for a while now, incredibly powerful, almost in many ways Keir Starmer's number two. Now she's taken that role into Downing Street, but as I understand it, you know, she still has a influential role, to put it mildly, in right down to the level of detail in terms of advisors' pay. And as I say, that is causing an awful lot of bad blood, because on the one hand, it looks like she's quids in, and they feel that they're underpaid. So yeah, I've certainly watched this space, because, you know, this type of briefing war behind the scenes is unsustainable in the long term. So I think something will have to give.
Indeed. And what's interesting, as I understand it, she was told before she asked for this pay rise, and she was told, look, you might want to keep it under the level of what the Prime Minister gets to avoid this very story. And she said, no, I'm fine with the extra cash, thanks. I'll take the wonga.
Well, exactly, yeah. No, she can't say that she wasn't warned, and these unhappy advisors have taken full advantage of that choice that Sue Gray made.
Let's have a look at this story. Scottish independence, something that might be closer to your heart as a man from that very proud nation. Of course, it's largely seen by most that the argument of Scottish independence, mostly advanced by the SNP, there are a few others from other parties, of course, but generally speaking, this was core to what they stood for. Now, despite still being there, they are completely deflated. The government, the Labour government, have no desire for this, no appetite for this. The previous Tories didn't. However, one pollster is warning that it's foolish to assume that the argument is over and done with.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it's not over and done with. If you look at the opinion polls, it's roughly, support for independence is roughly where it was 10 years ago, so around about 45, 46%. You know, that's not insignificant. So there is still think, a desire for the issue to be revisited at some point in the future. But right now, there's certainly no prospect of it, I'd say, over the next certainly 5 years, possibly 10 years.
Yeah.
It's not least because the SNP are going through a lot of trouble at the moment. They obviously lost a lot of seats at the general election. The one really to keep an eye on is the next Scottish Parliament election in 2026. You know, if they've been in power there remarkably for 17 years,
yeah.
So it'll be almost 2 decades by the time we get to that election. If they were to lose power there, then that would definitely take off the agenda.
I was going to say, if they're wiped out at that point, then that is kind of end of argument for a generation or two, I think we could safely say.
I would have thought so, yeah, absolutely. So it'll be interesting to see exactly how that result goes. But, you know, we know as well that ultimately it's up to Westminster. Unless Westminster agrees that there should be another referendum, then it just ain't happening, you know. Yeah. So David Cameron agreed before the 2014 referendum, but I don't see any circumstances right now anyway that Westminster government, be it Labour or Conservative, are going to give the SNP what they want as far as a second referendum is concerned.
Final word, if we could, Kevin. Ed Davey, he's a funny little character, our Ed, isn't he? But of course, we forget the fact that the leader of the Liberal Democrats does have 72 MPs. He's only, 50 behind the opposition. That's closer than it's, I think, possibly than it's ever been, and certainly as I can remember. So he did rather well at the last election, of course, and he was slightly unconventional in the way that he kind of ran his campaign. He was often seen on an inflatable, skiing on something, dangling from something else, and getting wet, getting squirted. I mean, this was what he did. And yesterday at the party conference, he pitched up dancing to an ABBA song. Is this man serious?
Well, it's a very good question. You know, he's got to be careful. And I think it was all well and good during the general election campaign, doing the roller coasters and the bungee jumps and all that type of thing. It got him noticed. It got his picture in the paper when otherwise he probably wouldn't have managed it. That's fine during the campaign. And obviously it was successful. They won 72 seats. However, now the general election is a distant memory, and it's going to get down to the serious business. Now, they say they want to be the real opposition, but yeah, you're just showing pictures there of him arriving in Brighton for the conference on a jet ski. So, you know, I think maybe it's time for him to put the stunts to bed, at least until the next general election, maybe, and actually come up with some concrete policies as to how he's going to hold Labour to account and, as they say, see off the Conservatives once and for all. And I don't think all these stunts are really going to manage to help him to. And also,
using ABBA's "Take a Chance on Me" is it's not very unequivocal, is it? I mean, it's kind of, you know, go on, give me a go, give me a try. Yeah. It's it's a little bit. I mean, it's a nice little foot tap at a conference, and apparently, I never thought that I don't know what the collective term is for. The collective noun for a group of Lib Dems. I'm sure we can get people texting in, and many of them will be unbroadcastable. But between the chanting crowd, they seem to be. It was almost evangelical at one point, as there he was, Ed Davey, the preacher man, on the stage, and you know his flock singing along, almost discombobulating with political excitement. Kevin, it was extraordinary.
It was extraordinary, although unfortunately for Ed Davey, the lapel mic that he had on did pick up his singing, which was absolutely atrocious.
Yeah, so that's never a good look.
I don't think that did him any favours. But yeah, you're right. They're obviously very excited, and you got to give them that first conference since a brilliant general election result for them. So you can excuse them being a little bit maybe overexcited. But as I say, now it's time to sort of prick that bubble and bring them back down to earth and actually come up with some serious policies, or else people will just see them as a bit of a joke part.
Yeah, I think so. And there is a real danger zone there, and I hope he's aware of it. Listen, Kevin, thank you as ever. Kevin Schofield joining us live from the Houses of Parliament. He's the political editor at HuffPost UK. Thank you to him.